All right, you have just seen an introduction to the Great Yellowstone ecosystem. Welcome to the European Gallery. I want to stop and give you a little background on art. Remember, wildlife art is the oldest form of art. Think about the caves of Lascaux. Think about Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple, 12 to 15,000 years old, at the cusp of when we went from hunter-gatherer to agriculture. All of it is T-shaped pillars, animals carved, stone on stone. So it is the oldest form of art. Now, the Greeks, we know, were the ones that said, oh, we're so much better than the other animals. They sort of changed the aspects of art. But through the ages, religion, the Lion of God, the Lion of the Lamb of God, the Lion of Judah, all this. Animals were important, even today. Think of sports teams, where an animal represents the strength, the speed, and so forth. So animals have always been important, somehow. So here we're talking about the beginnings of modern wildlife art. The changes that came with the scientific, essentially, romanticism, but the scientific revolution, which we started with something, I love this, I just read it in the book. For the first time, we admitted ignorance. Before that, we always said, oh, it's God's will, or something. You know, scientific revolution of the mind, they said, yeah, but I don't get that. Where did that come from? I want to understand it. Scientific method, and then, of course, that led to Darwinism here. So, the oldest piece, which really doesn't quite fit with the rest from 1650, we have over here by the followers of Paul Deveau. It is called the Garden of Eden, but who knows what it originally was called because it changed hands so many times. And people say, well, did they get off the ark there? Because there's a lot of 2x2. However, you'll notice everyone's furious, including the swans. There's a lot of angst in this picture. And also there's huge snarling dogs. There is represented something called Pedimento, an elephant who was fingered over and kicked out later on. So I have seen one painting by the man Paul Deveau. It was in a teeny little gallery in the south of France, and it was very bucolic and pastel, and the hunters were running after a stag. So who knows how they got this in. The next painting is the Tower of London, which had an imagery precursor of the sea. Northcote, most of his paintings had a historical reference. Petworth House in England has about 8 or 10 of these. Every one of them is a historical reference. I don't think this is the Little Princess in the Tower because there is one there of that. So I'm not sure, but I think what we're learning is artists are beginning to think about animal attitudes and thought. We have the tiger that is completely different. But we have the spirit of the wild up here. So maybe our attitudes are beginning to change toward animals then. The French were always romantic, of course. Does that surprise you? Géricault and Delacroix were the two most important French romantics. Their work is in major museums. His masterpiece is The Raft of Medusa. It's in the Louvre. This was copied from a Rubens. These two lions were pulling a wagon with one of the big fleshy Rubenesque goddesses in it, and he freed them, perhaps a political statement. However, his version of these were copied by people who, in fact, were painting pictures of Noah's Ark. So these lions got around. Jerome went with Napoleon to Egypt, or with the entourage, and I've always thought of this as a tiger and house cat, or a house cat and tiger drag. Not really what a tiger looks like, and certainly not where one lives. They live in the jungle. He's observing cranes. Interestingly, I recently saw at the Milwaukee Art Museum a picture by Jerome of a lion observing the dawn. So he must have had this thing on big cats going. But he did paint, I saw a painting he did of Cleopatra did a lot of the women of the Middle East, and if you look at the frame, it seems to be written in Arabic. So now, when you're talking about the French, we have an artist that was a bit before her time socially, and Rosa Bonheur, and this is a pastel, of course, not painting. She owned a farm south of Paris and apparently observed animals there, and we begin to see more interest in observing animals in their natural habitat and painting them in some relation to where they really lived with some of her work. This painting was in a cloakroom in a hotel in Washington, D.C. when Bill Kerr found it, and there's an interesting story about how we finally got it. But we began to get more and more artists who were really interested in, well, what do animals actually look like? What is their behavior? And this wolf, it's not a wolf, it's my wolf, two falcons killing a red kite. You'll notice they have jesses on their legs, so they have been flown by a handler. Kites tended to kill the animals they wanted to hunt, such as bunnies. And so it was to their advantage to try and kill them. But you look and you'll see we're paying more attention to the feathers. How many there are, what exactly are the shapes of the beaks and so forth. We're beginning to pay more attention, and this is when, of course, Darwinism became more important. You know, people began to say, well, why do two birds that are the same breed have different colors? Where did this evolve from? What relationship did mammoths have to elephants? We began to think about these things. And as a result of that, we got the four artists who were the original, shall we say, founding fathers of contemporary wildlife art from the mid-19th century on. The oldest of which is Le Carthuza. He was a German. There are three Germans and a Scandinavian. He was a German who pretty much stayed in Germany. I understand he came to the U.S. once, found he had to sleep in a tent in the rain and was not amused. I think he was more of the schnapps back at the hunting lodge type. But he mostly stayed in Germany. And it was particularly noted for his stags. And just look at this stag. He's just marvelous. He's doing something. He's not just this stuffed guy standing there. He's moving, he's observing, he's looking at something. And it's just very three-dimensional. It's really a lovely painting. The second of these is Bruno Lillefors, who was the Scandinavian and clearly wasn't very interested in the background if you observe the grass. But this is a peregrine grabbing a duck. Very good peregrine. This is not the duck's cell phone. Looks like it though, doesn't it? It's a patch on his wing. The color was very iridescent, and I don't think they had the paints that allowed him to do an iridescent look, but it looks very, people look at this, your eye is drawn to that, and see, that's so bizarre, and you'll see that it's not terribly good over here either. And I think that was one of the things, because the falcon peregrine is nicely done. The third of these was Kuhner. He was the one who went to African Asia. He observed the animals in their natural habitat. He studied them. All four of these guys were hunters and painters. So they spent a lot of time out there with hunting guides and so forth. He probably spent a good deal of time out in the veld with this. And if you look at these two lions, they're engaged. They're looking at something. They're not just sitting there. They're looking at something. It's a full moon. Notice the light of the moon on the lions. Very good. He was particularly known for those. In fact, he was nicknamed Lion. So that's what's going on here. The fourth of them was our good friend. We have this one, Carl Rungus. But I'm not going to talk about Carl Rungus here because we have a whole gallery dedicated to Carl Rungus because the man who started this museum collected Carl Runguses for many years. So Cynthia is going to tell you all about Carl Rungus in the next gallery.
Susan, that was exactly 10 minutes.
Great. Yeah, it was, exactly.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
That was on the dot, 10
Yeah.
minutes.
Was it? Wow.
Okay, so I really like this gallery because I think the history is important. So that's why I always like to come in here first.
I like
know.
that she did go around to kind of give people a sense.
I never did get this sculpture, which I usually do.
Yeah. But you
What
said
do you
for
say?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, what
What
do
do
you
I say about the sculpture? I'll say, look at this. Barre, who was an Honorary sculptor and the first import sculptor of animals, he tried to do the fur or the hair on that lion. And he's killing a snake, and that's the symbol of evil. Very quickly, almost all the sculptures got away from that. They said, now a mane of a lion, maybe as you put within the Rodin, you can see the mane. But no fur, no hair. And in fact, he got away from hair too.
Yeah.
He also never saw them in the wild. This is from Zour Menagerie. So if you look at the contemporary sculptures, no matter what the surface is, they're really interested in the muscles, the structure, the movement, not the hair. That's about all I ever say.
Great. Any thoughts about, how you might have done it differently, what you liked, what you might change yourself? People have different styles, and that's perfectly fine. What I liked, Susan, was that we came in and you didn't stop at every piece, but you stopped at some of the key ones, and you gave us a sense of why people were maybe creating these pieces, which was for different reasons. That came across loud and clear. Plus, I learned some interesting facts about particular pieces, yet you had carefully selected which ones. There was a rationale. You didn't just talk about the art until you ran out of time. You had a scope and a vision inside your head. I want to make sure they know this, I want to make sure they know this, and I want to finish by this time. And it felt like you did that.
Good job, Susan.
It's hard, isn't it, to stick with the time?
I probably, in reality, take about 3 or 4 more minutes
In here, yeah.
in here. Yeah.
And depending on the group and how much time we have, you're not always going to have exactly 10. You might have less, you might have more, but we just said 10 for today as like kind of an average about what it might be like when you're on station or doing the zone.
Right. But if you take 10 minutes in every gallery, it can really get quite long.
Oh, yeah.
I don't take 10 minutes in Rungus when I move into there, though, from here. A few salient facts about Rungus. A little bit about the field sketches and how one of them is the picture is taken and so forth. The difference between his stuff in Wyoming and the stuff in Canada.
Nice.
Yeah, not much.
But the point being, you should have this clear vision in your mind of what's the most important thing and have an outline in your mind. Like you just said, I want them to know the difference between, that he worked in Canada, he worked in Wyoming. I want them to know he worked outside. I want, these are your mental outline. If I can only have this much time, this is what I'm going to say.
Jane, how do you control the time when visitors are going to ask questions, possibly?
Oh, good question. Well, that's a good question. I think so what you could do if you have 10 minutes, you could say, okay, I'm only going to talk for 8 minutes, and I'm going to leave 2 minutes for questions at the end. That's what I would do probably. If
I just tell them to interrupt me.
There's another option. Say, at any point, if you have a question, please interrupt me. Then different tour guides feel differently about that. Some people would rather wait till the end, and some people don't mind being interrupted. Either is fine. It's your preference.
For me, my important thing always with the visitors, though, is to listen to them and react to them, and if they've never been here before, give them something that they go away with saying, that was fantastic. So if somebody really has an urgent question, I would stop and answer it and then skip something else. I mean, if you've got them engaged enough to ask a good question,
And it's important
Very satisfying.
It's important to let visitors know at the beginning of a tour if it's okay to
Yes.
interrupt. Like
Yes.
Susan said, I tell them, and probably Martha, you do the same thing, say, if at any point you have a question, please interrupt me. Because otherwise they'll be like, you don't know when it's appropriate to ask a question.
I find that often if they're in the way of the airport, which happens, you say, how much time do you have?
Yes. Do you think that?
And there are things that I absolutely skip. Like I walk by and say, this is Jacqueline Collects.
Right.
Some of these have been donated to the museum and some haven't. It'd be fun for you to look at them. Moving on.
Right.
You know?
That's good. Any other comments or questions in this space? That was great, Susan, thank you. I was like, she's not gonna make it, she's not gonna make it. She made it.
I was really humping.
You did it.
I kept thinking, I'll skip this, no, maybe I won't. You know?
Okay, next we're gonna move into the JKM Gallery, and Rachel is gonna talk about the Pueblo.
So the JKM Gallery is in chronological order, starting with kind of the oldest here with the birdstones, and then it gradually comes around chronologically, kind of with the exception of this case, which was just created in about a year ago. This collection of pottery was created by various artists throughout different areas and eras, so it covers kind of the gamut. Without looking at the labels, do you think you could guess which one might be the oldest? And which one might be the most recent? Yeah, which one do you think might be the oldest?
The top middle one.
Yeah, which one might be the newest? Any guesses? This one here, or up here? No, this one here. Yeah, that's a good guess. And then some of these we don't have the dates for specifically yet. That's kind of an ongoing project. Sometimes it's hard to know. But this one over here,
Looks like it's the oldest.
do you think?
Yeah.
Why do you think so?
It is decorated.
It's not painted. They didn't paint them. The earliest pieces were not. And that one is dated 875 to 1040, and it's a duck bear effigy with a handle. BC or A?
Utilitarian.
So these are some of the oldest forms of wildlife art in our museum, and the animals here convey spiritual significance and serve as a kind of a communicator of the divine, but also function as secular inhabitants of the earth. So they're painting some animals that they would have seen. Most of this collection was donated by Mr. and Mrs. Joshua Wetzel around 2012. Mr. Wetzel was a scientist and a conservationist who founded or led the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and worked to conserve large tracts of land in Pennsylvania. And represented in this collection are three primary cultures. Hohokam Mogollon with kind of the subcategory of Mimbres, and Ancestral Pueblo. Ancestral Pueblo used to be called Anasazi, which we've decided is kind of a derogatory term because it means, it's a Navajo word that means either ancient enemies or the ancient people who aren't us, that kind of thing. So we don't know what they called themselves, so we're calling them Ancestral Pueblo. The others, the Mimbres, Mogollon, Hohokam, pretty much disappeared by the 12th century, but Ancestral Pueblo is basically still around today in some varying form. Some other terms that might be good to know: Pueblo is a Spanish word for village or a group of houses, but it also kind of refers to the culture in general or a lifestyle. So you'll see it kind of used both ways. An effigy is an object kind of made in the likeness of a person or an animal. So these two that look like a duck and then has a little bear shaped on the handle, those are called effigies. And pottery's been around, it's been a hallmark of Pueblo culture for thousands of years, kind of arguable how many thousands. Different areas of the Southwest and different Pueblos have different, very distinct styles. but the way in which they're made is basically the same. Most of them are coils, so you start with a flat base, long rolls of clay. The clay is dug typically from places that probably were known for generations as a good source of clay. It would have been information that was passed down. So they've dug the clay, they take impurities out if there's big rocks or organic materials. They take all that out. Sometimes they add temper, so they might add some crushed rock or even crushed pottery sherds. They'll put it in there for even firing, helps to prevent cracks and to make the vessel stronger. And then they were scraped with a scraper made out of either wood or a board, often rounded. They'd smooth the inside, obviously, if they were using it, they'd want the inside to be smoothed. The outside, sometimes they would smooth and sometimes they would leave corrugated. Most of the ones here are basically smooth, except for this guy. And when you look at the labels, they're basically the vessels are going to be named kind of in three parts. The first part of the name is going to be where it was from or what pueblo it might be associated with, Zuni or Hopi, that kind of thing. The second part is the color. So some are black on white, some are white on black, some are polychrome like this one, the kind of red-brown and the black and the white. Sometimes the white was the clay itself, other times it was a slip made out of clay. And the black was typically kind of a paint made with organic materials. Sometimes minerals like iron might make a black or a red color. And then the third part of the label is going to be the vessel shape. If it's a bowl or a rounded kind of an olla or a jar or a pitcher, plate, we have a plate, which is kind of cool. And common imagery, nature, animals, spiritual beliefs of creation. There's some other interesting imagery in these, like arrows, for example. This piece right here intrigues me because we don't know a lot on the label. Artist unknown, untitled, ceramic. Doesn't really tell us much. But to me, there's so much going on with this because it's an odd shape and it's got these funky handles. But there's all this imagery too. So you've got this cool arrow. Arrows can mean direction, force, movement, or power. Used in a landscape, they can indicate direction, but sometimes you'll see it in an animal. You'll see an arrow. Like in this one, there's like a deer with an arrow coming down the mouth into the body. And they call that a heart line, which is basically showing the pathway of breath or the animal's sort of life force, or the animal spirit's life force, basically. So when the animal is shown with an arrow going inward, as this one is, it could act as a plea for improved hunting conditions, perhaps. Arrows, lines, hatched lines can indicate rain. Diagonal lines can indicate the journey of a spirit between worlds, which this one has a lot going on. It also has this spiral, which is a big symbol too, which could symbolize man's journey through different worlds, levels of consciousness, basically. And steps, which also have on this one, steps are symbolizing journeys through the underworld, the upper worlds, and kind of a part of the emergence myth, if you've ever read about the emergence myth. So anyway, I'd like to know more about that piece. Yeah, I think that's...
Did you say which one was the modern?
This one's 2014.
I figured it had to be because it is so delicate, and if it had been
It's
old,
wonderful.
it would have been broken.
Right. It's also just very different. The painting, the style is very different. It's got this sponging, and these kind of zigzags are very different.
So that's the most recent.
That is the most
And which
recent,
is the
according to
oldest? Which one was the oldest?
Probably this guy.
Okay.
And what did you say the time period was?
Well, it runs the gamut here. This one, we've got a date on here of 875 to 1040 AD.
Okay.
And like I said, they're not all necessarily dated at this point, so there could be one older, but I kind of doubt it, since they didn't start to paint them until about 1200, I want to say, usually 12 to 1400 AD.
Thanks.
Well, what connection
did the people who donated this give to us, since they're really people from the east?
Right. Well, the only thing that I could find out was that the Wetzels visited in the 60s a lot. They backpacked and camped in the Wind Rivers, and also in Utah a lot too. So I get the feeling that they've visited here a lot, unless Adam has anything to add to that.
Their son still lives here, Josh Wetzel.
Oh.
So when we had the POTS exhibit
Yeah.
5 years ago or whenever that was, they lent. These were already here, but then they lent some other ones from their collection. So there's still a family connection
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
And he also, the Wetzel Family Foundation gave the money for the case.
Oh, that was nice.
It's a great.
So beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Yep. It is
Yeah.
quite nice.
I think it's really interesting that all the Native American art is incorporated into everyday objects.
Mhm.
The beadwork, the pottery, everything that's in things they use.
Yeah, and they have a special connection to the clay too, because it comes from the earth and it's very temporary. They break a lot, and the clay would kind of speak to the artist in a lot of ways, from what's been told, that if you want to decide what shape to make your pot, basically the clay will tell you, or what design do you want to do, the clay will tell you.
Okay.
Okay, timing. It is 10 minutes and 20 seconds right now. She finished right at 8 minutes. And then there felt like a natural lead into questions, which was really nice. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on, how you received that as visitors, as fake visitors watching, and how you maybe would suggestions for how you might do it differently. You had a really clear outline of what you thought was important. I loved that Rachel talked about who are these people, and she identified the names, and some of those pronunciations are hard, and she got them all right. Would you say that again so people?
Hohokam,
Mm-hmm.
Mogollon, which Membrace is part of, and Ancestral Pueblo.
So
Asazi previously.
that was great that she mentioned the people. I love that she started with a question to get us to start
did
looking
too.
closer.
Yeah,
Which is the oldest?
I would
Which
have
is
liked
the
to have
newest?
more questions or more interaction, but I didn't.
Well, that's great to
It's hard
start
to
with
know
that,
what
because
people
I
know
could
about
just
it.
see
I feel like a
people.
lot of people
I
don't
could
know.
see people starting to engage with them on a different way. Suggestion: just make it clearer before you move on. Which is the oldest? Which is the newest?
Right.
Maybe I wasn't listening carefully. I think I picked up on that being the oldest, and because it's unpainted, I didn't pick up until the end on that being the newest.
Right.
So maybe make that a little clearer. I loved a little reference to how they were made, the coil pottery. I loved the reference to where the color came from. You had a reference to the different shapes and what they meant, and then you started to lose me a little bit, because I've heard ola before, but I don't know what an ola is.
Right.
Could you
One
clarify
of the
that
things,
a little
in
bit?
10 minutes it was like, okay, how much do
Right.
because there are about 6 types of
Shapes?
6 categories or so of shapes that everything fits neatly into. This guy doesn't fit neatly. I'd call it a jar, but it's very rounded.
Is that an ola or a round jar, or what is
I
an
don't
ola?
know. This one doesn't say it says ceramic on
Okay.
the tag. This is a pitcher because it has a long neck with a handle and then the rounded base. And pots too, vessels are named after body parts. So they have a body, which is going to be kind of the midsection. Sometimes they have feet, they have necks. So you kind of think of them as a human almost. This is the neck of the jar. This is an ala. A good example of an ala would be this one here. They typically did have a neck, a wider neck than a jar. A jar has a very narrow neck usually, and then they kind of have this bulbous body. This is a duck, a duck vessel. And this one I think they probably call an ola.
Yeah.
This one they call a plate. This is a bowl.
So that's
Bowl
kind
with
of
another
nice.
base.
How do you all feel about? Is that too much information, or do you think people are?
Yeah, that's useful, but I'm
Interested.
missing the word, the second one there, what are you calling that?
Ala?
Ala. It's spelled
O-L-L-A.
yeah.
Ala. Yeah.
OLLA.
Oh, it might be Ola. I've always said Ala, but I'm from that might be Michigan talk. I don't know. Did you say Ola?
I think we say Ola,
Yeah.
I
but
think so.
Ola sounds too much like hello to me. Ola.
yeah.
Yeah. I think the upper right-hand one, is that, what would you
This
call
one?
that shape?
This is probably. Let's see. It says Ala.
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
the wide
So
neck.
just because it has a neck, sometimes they're wider or they're taller necks.
Mhm.
But if it has a neck that isn't very narrow, like I don't really have a good jar. I mean, this is about the closest.
I think it's also was really important that you tied in the wildlife imagery and you pointed that out. You pointed out the deer and what else did you point out?
Pretty much just the deer.
The
for
deer,
wildlife.
talked
I mean,
about
that could almost be a whole
the
other.
heartline.
That's true. You could almost do a whole other spiel just on wildlife. This is an owl, but this
Oh,
is a
right.
modern piece. This is a contemporary piece.
Right.
What do they call this one? Flat-topped jar.
That's chip and dip.
Yeah, chip and dip bowl.
Lots of dip, not so many.
Not so many chips. The chips are gonna fall off.
If we did
But that was, she stuck to the time, she hit on some high points, things that most people would be wondering about, and then maybe even some things that I didn't know enough to wonder about, which was interesting too, and left time for questions at the end. You can probably tell she studied anthropology as well as art in college. Well done, Rachel. Next, we're going to move to the Conservation Gallery.
Do they think that?
The Conservation Gallery. If you've been here before, you may notice that the artwork on the exterior of the room, we are regularly changing out, so it may be different from if you were here this past summer and saw Andy Warhol images. Now we have featured some animals that have interesting conservation stories around the perimeter, and we have the sculpture, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, Steve Kestrel's Silent Messenger, which pretty regularly stays where it is. One thing that I want to draw your attention to is this interpretive piece on the side here, and we ask an important question that is a good place to start for anyone entering this space. And the question is, can art protect wildlife? And we have a few historic examples over here. The first one that you read about is Thomas Moran. Maybe you noticed the couple of paintings by Thomas Moran just as you came in the gallery doors. But Thomas Moran created beautiful paintings of this area, Yellowstone and the Tetons, and his artwork was really instrumental in convincing Congress to make Yellowstone the very first national park. There was land that was protected, habitat for wildlife. So that is one example of how art definitely can protect wild things and wild places. Another example that we mention over here is John James Audubon. And you may have seen some of his work in the Tiny exhibit. He's best known for his bird art. He was trying to, his great idea was to paint every single bird in North America. And after he died, his name, John Audubon, was used for the Audubon Society, which it inspired this one of the very first conservation organizations that is still active today. Around the corner, we list some other artists, which you can explore on your own. To this day, many of the artists who are living artists who are in our collection will tell you the reason they paint wildlife is to raise awareness and to help people to understand not only the beauty of these wild animals, but some of the issues related to their survival on into the future. Let's look at the artwork on the walls just a little bit. You may notice the African elephant over here on this wall. And if you know anything about elephants, you know that the reason why they are, the main reason they're endangered and are in a lot of trouble is what?
Poaching.
Poaching for their tusks. And you can see some beautiful tusks on that lead elephant there. as you move the other direction, you see pronghorn here. You may see pronghorn as you're visiting here in Jackson Hole, although right now it's winter, and they typically migrate out of this valley down towards Pinedale, where the snow is less deep and it's easier to get to the forage, to the grasses. But the issue with pronghorn has to do with habitat. They need wide open spaces. When fences go up, when highways and roads and housing developments and shopping areas intrude on their wide open spaces, all of a sudden they don't have the ability to do these uninterrupted migrations, which are quite long. They can get caught in barbed wire fences, and really it's an issue with the pronghorn. Their survival into the future is an issue having to do with that space and that uninterrupted ability to move through that space. There's a fabulous audio tour message. I encourage you to stop by the download table right inside the front gallery doors, and you'll hear Renee Seidler talking about the pronghorn story in this region. The wolf has a really interesting story. Many of you may know that the wolf was eradicated in this area. It was completely wiped out in Yellowstone National Park by hide hunters, people who wanted its furs, even more so people who wanted just to get rid of what they considered a nuisance, an animal that preyed on livestock, that was just considered not a desirable animal to have around. So they were wiped out, and then they were reintroduced fairly recently to Yellowstone, and now you may see them in this area. They've moved out of Yellowstone and they've come down into the Tetons. The very first winter after their reintroduction, when I'd park in the employee lot down here south of the museum and walk to the door, I would regularly see wolves on the refuge. Now they're around, they're not quite as visible, but you never know, you might see one. The bighorn sheep, if you go over by on the elk refuge, on the dirt road that's across from the National Elk Refuge, if you look straight out from the museum, over by the hospital, you can get on that dirt road and you may see some bighorn sheep. The reason they are in trouble is due to sickness, and they are very susceptible to a pneumonia-like virus that is wiping a lot of them out. But again, that's an audio stop. You can learn more about it on our audio tour. John Mayanzinski, who's a local biologist, gives the message on that audio tour. It's really interesting. Polar bears? Why are polar bears in trouble?
Habitat.
Habitat, more specifically, global warming. Right, global warming, habitat loss. The polar ice cap the ice is shrinking. Being the ability to go out on the ice and hunt for seals is crucial to their diet. And if they can't get out there on the ice, they can't access those seals. Typically, as the seasons change, as summer gives way to fall, they are just, if you go up to like Churchill, Manitoba, where a lot of people go to see polar bears, you'll see them just pacing along the shoreline, waiting for that ice to freeze up so they can start to eat again. They're basically starving through the summer until they can get back out on the ice. So with the number of days, months, weeks of ice being intact, shrinking, they have less and less time to be feeding on those seals. They're getting thinner and they're having fewer cubs, and that's their story.
I find this a lot more discouraging because there really isn't anything man can do to save the situation. I mean, aside from eventually stopping global warming, but maybe that's not going to happen. But some of these other animals, certain practices can be put into effect to save them and to protect them.
Good point. Like the pronghorn, you've probably all seen the overpasses.
Yes.
They don't like to do underpasses, so people build overpasses over the highways where they can see, because that's their main defense.
Yeah.
They don't feel trapped underground, they can see, and then they feel safe to go over the overpasses, which is a great solution.
Yes.
Scientists are trying to figure out how to prevent the bighorn sheep from getting these diseases. Sometimes they're inoculated. They're studying that very closely. But as you said, this is a bigger, harder problem to solve.
Yeah. But I also read that I think it was the bighorn sheep up in the Tetons, they say that when people come up there, for instance, they climb mountain climbers, for example, they'll get up to some peak where people haven't been. And these animals will not stay in that area after people
People disrupt it.
here. And then they'll have to move somewhere else. But, I read that in the Jekyll Hunt area.
Yeah, and there was something else when you were talking about that, it made me think of, there was something in the paper recently about don't let them lick your vehicle, and the reason was, do you remember?
The chemicals.
In the,
They look for
it's
the
not
salt.
healthy. And you're not supposed to let them do that, it's
How
not
do you
healthy,
stop
it's not healthy for them, I guess you drive away, I guess you drive
Don't
away.
stop and watch and you keep moving.
Yeah.
So these are just a few stories, like I said, we're constantly changing it up, talking about not only regional wildlife, but wildlife around the world. But let's focus our attention right now on Steve Kestrel's piece, Silent Messenger. And I'd like to start, and you've all done this before, but I'd like to start just by, having you spend a moment to really look at it, and then just tell me what your observations are. What do you see?
It's dead.
Okay, you see what is the animal that is dead? You mentioned dead.
A crow. Is it a crow or raven?
It's a raven, but it's way outsized, so a lot of people are confused by that because it's much bigger than they are in
His
real
head
life.
is carved at a different angle than it actually is.
Does everybody notice that? The head, the way the coffin or sarcophagus is carved, the beak's pointing this way, but this bird is beak pointing out. So, Allison said it is dead. Do people have different opinions about that?
There's a question.
There's a question, Martha says.
Yeah.
Is it dead? Is it dead or alive?